a beijar na boca, vida louca e bebedeiras. Até ontem eu queria morrer solteiro, mulheres e gastar dinheiro, sem norte nem sul. Hoje o que eu quero é casar contigo, quero ser o teu melhor amigo, mulher da minha vida, meu coração ficou. Quero ser fiel a ti, ao teu lado renasci, mulher da minha vida, meu coração você mudou. Mas foi no teu olhar que eu sosseguei, juro encontrei um caminho pra seguir. Foi só te olhar que o meu mundo parou e a minha vida mudou da noite pro dia. Andar de mãos dadas pelo jardim, quero ficar contigo até o fim da minha vida, até o sol brilha mais e o coração vive a paz que o poeta escreveu. Foi no teu olhar que eu sosseguei, juro encontrei um caminho pra seguir. Foi só te olhar que o meu mundo parou e a minha vida. Foi no teu olhar que eu sosseguei, juro encontrei um caminho pra seguir. Foi só te olhar que o meu mundo parou e a minha vida mudou da noite pro dia. Mudou da noite pro dia.
When the sun goes down, we don't stop the talk. Channel Africa, the best nighttime radio.
Abedi. Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you'll be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Get the news, music, and lifestyle of Africa on Channel Africa, the African perspective. When the sun goes down, we don't stop the talk. Channel Africa, the best nighttime radio. Winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And it is 2100 hours on this Thursday evening. A warm welcome to you. This is Africa World Hour here on Channel Africa, the African Perspective. I am indeed Tshepiso Makwetla. As we bring you the latest developments from in and around your world, whether it's from the heart of Africa to beyond all corners of the globe. Welcome to you. Thanks for joining us. We are live on the DSTV Plus app, and you can also find us on DSTV 802, SABC Plus app, and DSTV Audio Channel 802. Here's a look at your top stories this hour.
1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
The Thabo Mbeki Foundation says the African Peace and Security Dialogue is not a negotiating forum, but one of the initiatives aimed at achieving peace in Africa. The foundation is hosting delegates from different parts of the continent to discuss current instability on the continent. DRC President Felix Tshisekedi rejected the invitation, citing bias from the former president. The foundation's chairperson, Geraldine Fraser-Moleketi, says the majority of people on the continent have been displaced by conflicts and urged governments to take action and stop the wars.
In 2024, Africa suffered the most terrorism-related deaths globally for the 8th year in a row. On actual replacement and the unconstitutional changes of government as promises of state renewal, constitutional changes of government are increasingly seen by some as a response to deep governance failures and eroded trust in democracy.
A Mozambican on the CERNIC Most Wanted database and security dialogue, or rather Most database, has been killed in South Africa. CERNIC is responsible for serious organized crime investigations in Mozambique. The suspect, who goes by the nickname of Dollar Man, is a wanted kidnapping kingpin in both South Africa and Mozambique, following a shootout between the South African police and Mozambican national. An Indian businessman was reunited with his family following his kidnapping, in which the Mozambican national is believed to have been the alleged mastermind. Here is South Africa's police service spokesperson, Brigadier Athlenda Mate.
Unfortunate that he has died, because they would need him to answer to crimes that he had committed. But we have explained that we had no choice, because he was shooting at our law enforcement officers, and our law enforcement officers returned fire. In any case, our main goal is to arrest the perpetrator, because we need answers, we need to provide closure. But at times you find that these suspects, they are really brazen, and they then undermine the authority of the state, and they start shooting at the police.
And the Israeli government has dismissed a fresh offer by Hamas to free the remaining hostages and end the war in Gaza as a spin with nothing new to it. That's what it says. The offer came after US President Donald Trump urged the group to give up 20 hostages still thought to be alive. The BBC's Lys Doucette has the details.
There is huge fury among the Egyptian and Qatari mediators, who basically say that the so-called Witkoff plan, which is named after President Trump's envoy, Steve Witkoff, Israel had agreed to the plan. It was essentially Israel's plan. And Prime Minister Netanyahu, after for many months saying he only wanted a partial deal, is now saying he doesn't want a partial deal. And the mediators say that Israel has not engaged with this proposal for many weeks. So it looks like Israel is just biding its time.
And that's BBC's Lys Doucette reporting there. Now on to other news. Top jurists attending the inaugural J20 summit in South Africa have heard that judicial independence is in the public interest because it allows judicial officers to perform their functions without fear or favour. These inputs form part of the gathering's first discussion on advancing judicial independence and accountability under the overall theme of justice in a time of change, independence, innovation and cooperation. Justice Leona Theron of South Africa's Constitutional Court emphasised how independence is critical to the rule of law and accountability.
Judicial independence is not in the personal interests of the judiciary, but in the public interest, because it allows us as judicial officers to perform our duties without fear or favour. Judicial independence is fundamental to democracy. Judicial independence is critical to upholding the rule of law and the separation of powers, foundations that enable our democracies to thrive while ensuring accountability.
And finally, President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Paris for talks with what's known as the Coalition of the Willing, a grouping of around 30 mostly European Ukraine allies. They are discussing security guarantees for Ukraine following any ceasefire with Russia. The BBC's Hugh Schofield has the details.
What the Europeans are trying to do is convince the Americans to get involved as much as possible. It's a dance they have to do with Donald Trump because he blows hot and cold, but they are determined to get him on board to use his force and his muscle, American muscle, to try to arm twist Vladimir Putin into a ceasefire. To do that, they need to show to Donald Trump that the Europeans are ready to do their part of the burden sharing, which means providing some kind of guarantee, whether it's in the form of military force or promises of aid to the Ukrainians, as a guarantee once the ceasefire is in place.
Gender-based violence is destroying lives and tearing communities apart. It happens in homes, in schools, at workplaces, and too often in silence. But it doesn't have to continue. If you see it, speak out. If you are hurting, reach out. Because doing nothing is not an option. Listen to all 19 SABC radio stations from Wednesday 23rd of July for Hard Talk, discussions, advice, dramas, educational shows, and interviews around GBV with experts, survivors, lawmakers, and the whole country affected by gender-based violence. For all your favorite SABC radio stations, call 0800 428 428 to report abuse or get help. GBV, it ends with you. This message is brought to you by the SABC. Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. Musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you will be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on African World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
Catch us live on our social media platforms. We are on YouTube at Channel Africa 1. Same for TikTok, Instagram, and you can also reach us on Facebook, Channel Africa. And remember, if you want to reach us via email, just simply go to info@channelafrica.co.za. And you can send us your thoughts via WhatsApp. Let us know what your perspective is on some of the stories that we're covering. +27 63406 9126. Now, Algeria's High Commissioner to South Africa, Ali Al-Koui, says Algeria has conducted nearly 10 mediations in the Sahel since its independence in 1962. Most recently, the 2015 Algiers Agreement, brokered under the joint auspices of the African Union, ECOWAS, and European Union, United Nations, as well as the P5, to foster peace, stability, and development in the strategically vital region. Al-Koui highlighted Algeria's commitment through tangible support, saying that this included building schools and hospitals. He was speaking at the ongoing Thabo Mbeki African Peace and Security Dialogue in Magaliesburg in Gauteng province.
Addressing the second Thabo Mbeki Annual African Peace and Dialogue underway in Magaliesburg, Gauteng province, Algeria's High Commissioner to South Africa, Ali Acho, said Algeria remains deeply concerned about peace in the Sahel and continues its efforts. Acho says their efforts stems from 1962.
Since 1962, we did almost 10 mediation in the Sahel region to resolve the conflict, bring peace and stability and development to this region, which is very expensive for us, is very important region. And the last mediation was in 2015, the Algiers Agreement, which were under the auspice of the African Union, ECOWAS, European Union, United Nations, and the P5.
He says the current developments in the Sahel region are worrying.
Algeria is concerned by this the situation in this region, and we worked and we are working for the peace and the development in this region. We built a lot of schools and hospitals in that region just to bring peace and development, because the peace and development goes together.
Dr. Michelle Small, a member of the UN Working Group on the Use of Mercenaries, warns that in the Sahel, reliance on Russian-backed forces has morphed into regime protection, serving elite interests by guarding strategic assets like airports. More troubling, those forces have taken on policing roles, leading to numerous cases of arbitrary detention where individuals are held for a year or more without charges or trials, undermining fundamental justice and rule of law.
Yeah, so in the Sahel region, and I can talk to you about two cases specifically in Mali and CAR. What we have seen in CAR is that they have relied on military and security actors provided by Russia, and they are essentially engaged in regime protection. What regime protection looks like: you're providing security just to an elite. You're looking after airports, you're guarding national key points. But more worryingly, you're also now empowered to engage in policing and in arbitrary detention. And we know of many cases where individuals have been arbitrarily detained and a year later have not faced any charges or trial.
Dr. Small warns that Africa is experiencing a deep security crisis, and that while foreign states are offering various security packages, those often come at a heavy cost in exchange for access to the continent's mineral wealth.
I think for our continent, we first have to understand that we have a security crisis and we need security provision. There are many states beyond our shore that have the ability to offer us security packages. And for these security packages, minerals are in exchange. So this has become an unfortunate new conflict management model, which enriches states and actors beyond our continent and continues these patterns of dependency but also extroversion that we have long faced.
She also gave context to the Malian situation.
When we look at Mali, it's a slightly different picture. Wagner, now Africa Corps, are engaged in counterinsurgency operations. Again, this is very opaque. We are not clear, despite having asked, what is the nature of the agreement, what roles would be performed, what training and vetting had been received, and what protections are offered for populations. But just from what we've seen is that the Wagner forces engaged in indiscriminate attacks on civilian populations, which has included the destruction of entire villages, of water resources, rape, sexual assault, and ethnic targeting.
She says the involvement of foreign actors comes at a price.
And so this is the danger of handing over such a core and vital state function to external actors that is unregulated in terms of security provision.
Michael Mbewe, Channel Africa News, Magaliesburg.
We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet.
Você é fluente em português? É apaixonado por rádio e quer trabalhar na África do Sul? Você tem documentos que o qualificam para trabalhar na África do Sul? Nesse caso, podemos ter uma oportunidade para você trabalhar no Canal África. Envie seu currículo e demonstração para Canal África @ newsroom@channelafrica.co.za. Lembre-se, se você não receber alguma resposta nossa em 14 dias, isso significa que você não foi selecionado. Canal África, a perspectiva africana.
Africa, meet Abedi.
Yeah, that's me.
Abedi is a music lover through and through.
I really love African music.
He's got a taste for all kinds of tunes and spends his days listening to Channel Africa. Guess what? He didn't know.
Okay.
Channel Africa wants to help Abedi and all music lovers everywhere to discover even more incredible music. That is why Channel Africa is calling on all African musicians to submit their music. musicians, remember to give us all your relevant information. Make your submissions at music@channelafrica.co.za. Submissions are your chance to be heard on radio. But sadly, they do not guarantee that you will be playlisted. All submissions will be carefully reviewed to see if they meet our station's requirement. Channel Africa, the African perspective. When the sun goes down, we do the talk. Channel Africa, the best nighttime radio.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
It's 17 minutes past 9 now. Let's look at escalating tensions along the Kenya and Somalia border as armed Somali fighters are reportedly crossing into Kenyan territory, triggering panic in local communities. Several schools on the border region have been forced to shut down, and hundreds of families are fleeing their homes in fear. The Kenyan government has yet to issue a full statement, but the situation on the ground remains tense, with security forces reportedly being deployed to the affected areas. Now tonight we ask, what does this mean for the border security of both countries, and of course the residents? How are they coping? We get these answers from Channel Africa's Kenyan correspondent Alex Kiaire. Alex, a very good evening to you. So what can you tell us about the current situations? Are the tensions continuing to escalate? Okay, I understand that unfortunately that connection was lost, but we will try and get back to our correspondent Alex Kiaire, who is there where the situation is happening. So I'm actually just looking at the map now to look at where the Somali soldiers or fighters who reportedly crossed into Kenya are, and so we've seen this before during the summer of 2023, where Al-Shabaab operations along the Kenya-Somalia border significantly increased, raising concerns about a possible flare-up of cross-border activity. So between June and early August, we also saw records of over 90 political violent events involving Al-Shabaab militants in the border area. So we'll just find out exactly what is happening at the moment. And there have been various reports by various organizations. In fact, there has been a special report that has compiled these tensions about this. Okay, so I believe we do have Alex Kiaire, our correspondent, back on the line. Alex, so tell us about the current situations. We're reporting that tensions are escalating. Is that still the case?
Actually, there's nothing much happening on the Kenyan side apart from the complaints that the Jubilant forces are occupying parts of the country. But this, of course, is based on a very long-standing interactions between Kenya and Jubaland, which stems from the Kenyan invasion of Somalia to root out Al-Shabaab in 2011. And in the process, it formed a close working relationship with a man called Ahmed Madobe, who was who later on became the leader of Jubaland, and who I think until 2024 July, I had running with the current president of the entire country, Mahmoud Sheikh, over some reforms, and that's what led to the conflict that now is being witnessed in the country, which has seen Jubaland forces now escape into Kenya, which is more friendlier to them, and basically they feel like they're at home here, and which is of course causing a lot of tensions between the state and the local residents of Mandera County in northern Kenya.
And just looking back, as you say, this emanates from a long history, and we saw in 2023, as I was updating viewers and listeners here, that they were escalating tensions along that border space because of the presence of Al-Shabaab militants. But you're saying in this case it's more of friendly fire. The residents along that area may not necessarily have that understanding. Has there been engagements with both government or the military forces?
Actually, the intention of Kenya working closely with the leader of Jubaland was to ensure that it creates a buffer zone between Kenya and Al-Shabaab leadership within the southern regions of Somalia. But this didn't happen because still Al-Shabaab has been able to penetrate into Kenya and stage attacks within the country. So Kenyans are feeling like if the relationship was supposed to stop Al-Shabaab from attacking the Kenyan territory and is still happening, so there's no need of having this engagement between Jubaland region and the Kenyan government. So it was basically an agreement that was made between the leader of Jubaland, Ahmed Madobe, the Kenyan government, and also the Ethiopian government on their own, because this region of Jubaland borders both Kenya and Ethiopia. And even currently, it is being alleged that beyond Kenya, Ethiopian government is also supporting and financing and actually arming parts of Jubaland government and the forces that are now losing the battle, which is actually being credited to the support of China and Turkey for Mogadishu. So it's basically an issue of two governments in Kenya and Ethiopia being friendly to Jubaland. And now that Jubaland is losing the battle within its own territory, it's running towards Kenya, where it's feeling more like it's being accommodated by the state.
And which counties are being affected? Because I'm just looking at a map here of a 700-kilometer border with the Mandera, Wajir, and Garissa counties. So in this case, which are the ones where the Jubaland forces are entering?
Northern Kenya has around 4 or 5 counties, but the ones that are inhabited by members of the Somali community are 3. We're talking about Mandera, Wajir, and Garissa. Garissa County is the one that houses, or rather accommodates the Dadaab refugee camp, which was at some point the biggest refugee camp in Africa then. However, that has already been overtaken by the events that are happening in Syria. However, currently, the Jubaland forces are being accused of occupying parts of Mandera County, which has also been one of the epicenters of attacks by Al-Shabaab within the region.
So ordinarily, what would be the port of call in calming any anxieties for community members who may feel under threat to prevent any further escalation of tensions?
Actually, this is supposed to be under the Ministry of Defense, and we have a defense minister called Soipan Oletuya, who has been very quiet in the wake of the reports that some parts of the country are being occupied by a foreign entity. But so far, the minister who has been outspoken over the issue, actually denying the presence of these Jubaland forces in the Kenyan territory, is the one in charge of internal security, which is not actually within his purview. He's called Murkomen. Murkomen is only supposed to deal with events or other issues that affect the country within the boundaries of the country. But he's been talking about it, and that's the reason why we're seeing a lot of anger and angst towards the government, because the CS concerned of defense, that is the one who should be talking about it, and it's not, and she's not talking about it actually. So this is the reason why we have a lot of focus on this, because it's actually being seen as another failure by the current government, which is not being addressed, because the Kenyan territorial integrity is under threat, and the state is doing nothing, yet it's capable of doing it anyway, because I'm very sure that, granted, Kenyan troops can easily drive out the so-called occupying forces if they wanted to.
You mentioned the role of Ethiopia earlier on, and I just want to get a sense of just how complex is the security matrix or situation there. In the past, we've had U.S. forces who themselves had been patrolling part of that area. Is there still evidence of foreign forces, irrespective of which country it is, and for whom they are there for?
Kenyan forces, together with Ugandans and I think Burundians, have also been within the territory pushing against Al-Shabaab as part of AMISOM, which has actually changed to a new name, which I cannot recall right now. But it was part of the African Union force that was being financed by the UN in the battle against Al-Shabaab. However, there have been other political events that have been have created the current situation because beyond the Al-Shabaab, the country has a long history of clan-based politics which have been driving the agenda. And as it said right now, there's a clan called the Gare, which is accused of supplying the highest number of fighters to Al-Shabaab. And this is the reason why the current president, Mahmoud Sheikh, decided to change, using parliament, to change the political matrix in the country by pushing to stop clan-based politics and more into the issue that they call it the universal suffrage, where anybody can vote without having to think about the clan or anything. So this is the one that was being opposed by some leaders in the regional dispensation currently, because Somalia is a federal state. Leaders of several states within Somalia opposed this, including Ahmed Madobe, who leads Jubaland. The other leader of Somaliland also had their own issues with Mogadishu. So these are the things that are now pacing this conflicts within a bigger conflict involving Al-Shabaab and the state, and also the government of Mogadishu and its own regional governments that it wants to bring under its control.
And Alex, all of this occurs amidst a crisis, and I'm talking here in terms of a humanitarian situation. We have seen Save the Children and other aid agencies warn of the worsening food scarcity problem, and Somalia, Kenya are amongst those, including Nigeria and South Sudan.
Exactly, and the situation in Somalia is actually being blamed on beyond the governance issues, climate change. This is a region that borders another region within Ethiopia called the Afar region, which usually suffers extreme weather patterns, especially droughts, which have led to food challenges and shortages, and that's what actually informed the report by Save the Children, which said that the four countries, that's Kenya, of course, including Kenya, Nigeria, and Somalia, could be affected by these essential foods that are essential in the nutrition boost for the local populations, especially children. But this basically is a governance issue that is feeding into a bigger problem of climate change, which has been affecting so many countries, including Nigeria, which is also part of a bigger problem called Sahel regional problem, which is also being driven by climate change, clan-based differences, and also governance failures.
Alex, let's leave it there. Thank you very much for bringing us up to speed on the situation there between the Kenya-Somalia border, in which it says residents of the borderline counties are fleeing because of the entry into their villages by Jubilant forces. And he is saying that while the Ministry of Defense is supposed to be the one that is supposed to be in charge of the situation, in negotiating the breach in terms of keeping the situation calm. Nothing has come from them yet. Alex Garrier, our colleague, speaking to us from the border town there.
We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet, Channel 628. Channel Africa, where every moment is an African celebration. Feel the energy, feel the connection. Channel Africa, the African perspective.
Tsepiso Makwetla winds it down on Africa World Hour, 9 to 10 p.m.
And it is 21:30 Central African time. We look at the story now. Human Rights Watch urging African and Caribbean leaders to adopt a human rights-based approach to reparations at the upcoming Africa CARICOM summit. The summit is set for September 7th in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It'll bring together governments from both regions to address the lasting impact of slavery and colonialism. According to Human Rights Watch, former colonial powers have a responsibility under international law to provide reparations, and that civil society and affected communities must be at the center of those discussions. Now, to shed more light on these recommendations, we're joined by Africa Advocacy Director at Human Rights Watch, Alan Ngari. A very good evening to you. Thank you so much for speaking to us.
Good evening, Thabiso. Nice to be on your show and discussing this important topic.
So let's just first set the scene of the context under which this summit takes place and what the prevalence of pre-colonial conditions are on the continent at the moment.
Yeah, I think maybe let's dial back and just situate why reparations are important. And South Africa's experience with apartheid reparations shows us what happens when justice is partial, that deep wounds remain unhealed. And this is exactly what the African and Caribbean leaders coming together in Addis Ababa will be doing this week or in the following week for Africa CARICOM Summit to demand a unified global approach to reparations for slavery and to colonialism. And this comes just on the back of what the African Union calls 2025, the year on justice for people of African descent, and its decision to ensure that the next 10 years the question of reparations is front and center in the agenda of the African Union. And it's really a defining moment, this summit. African and Caribbean leaders, alongside civil society, like you mentioned, are signaling that reparations are a key and important issue. They're not a fringe demand, but a global call rooted in law, in morality, and our shared memory.
And the reason I wanted to get a sense of the prevalence of colonial era conditions on the African continent is that, for instance, if you look at some of the Western countries and their relationships with some of the African countries, there is a belief in, some say, in fact, strong evidence that they're still paying colonial taxes to their colonial masters. So I just want to understand, how widespread is it, and particularly in a manner that may seem even innocuous?
Every African country except Ethiopia has suffered the legacies of colonialism and slavery as well. And this is not history. This is our present. We are seeing the legacies of colonialism, the legacies of slavery at play, the inequalities that we see on the continent in every single country, in land ownership, in education, in the health sector, wealth distribution. We have on the continent the highest disparity in terms of the Gini coefficient between those with and those without. And these are all rooted in colonialism. And you know, what we are calling for then is for reparations to really look into this issue. It's about repairing what we see as intergenerational harm and building a more just future, a secure future for the entire world.
And I'm glad that you framed it that way, Alan, because a lot of the time when we're speaking about reparations, we refer to it as historical injustices, implying that they are something in the past. And this is why you see in the conversations, and I'll take South Africa as a classic example of where the conversation particularly the colonizer would insist that this is something that happened in the past, that we must move along. If we look at the BEE conversation, for instance, where redress is still very wanting.
Indeed. Look, we have very many examples. You've cited South Africa as one. We have ongoing injustices. For example, the Chagosian people who were driven out of their islands in Chagos, the archipelago just beneath the Maldives, beautiful Indian island oceans. To date, they do not have the right to return to these islands, and this is because the UK took those islands away from the Chagosians, forced them out of their islands between 1968 and 1973. One of the islands is currently leased to the United States and is a military base. There's an ongoing negotiation between the UK and Mauritius on these islands. But, you know, what we are cementing is that these colonial injustices are ongoing. In fact, we have characterized that occupation and that forcible transfer as amounting to crimes against humanity. Just next door to South Africa, the Ovaherero, the Nama are still waiting for reparations for the genocide that took place over a century ago. And the Namibians, while they might have offered an apology, there has been little to no movement in terms of reparations from a holistic point of view. And I must just add, Tshepiso, that reparations is much more than just monetary compensation, that there are steps in international law that must be abided by, and the former colonial powers, most of them in Europe, must really reckon with the past in order that we live in a just and equitable world, which we are fighting for, both as Africans as well as people of African descent, including the Caribbean nations.
And speaking of the Ovaherero and Nama people, you have said Germany, it recognized its culpability, but it has questioned international law, saying that at the time it did not give rise to a right to reparations. So is this the general posture of colonizers and European governments in particular, or has there been some sort of progress?
It's a very difficult argument to have with European nations, especially those that perpetrated crimes related to colonialism. Namibia is not alone. The United Kingdom, in a very famous case against that was brought against them by the Mau Mau in Kenya, is one such example. But at least there we saw some sense of justice, reparative justice, in the sense that some compensation was paid out to a few families of the Mau Mau veterans who fought for the liberation of that country together with many others. But it's the idea that these European powers do not want to sit on the table. Every year at the Human Rights Council, we have a resolution, and which is sponsored mostly by a lot of global South states, and South Africa takes a lead on this, and we will be seeing that in the coming session beginning the 8th of September in Geneva, a resolution that looks at racism, that looks at colonialism, that looks at the question of reparations. These are often glossed over by European states. These are often issues that are said that they do not meet, at the point, like you mentioned, was not part of international law, but that is not true. International human rights law is very clear. Victims of gross violations, including slavery and colonial crimes, have a right to remedy, have a right to reparation. A simple apology, for example, that was given by Namibia by Germany, or expressions of regret, as we hear from other colonial powers, that's not enough. That falls short. Reparations are a legal duty. They are not charity, and they are key to addressing the systemic inequalities we see today. We will not change the world system if we do not address the issues of the past effectively.
The various human rights instruments that exist, including like the Vienna Declaration, we're just looking at the anniversary of the inception or the birth of the United Nations, including Geneva Conventions, and speaking about their relevance and if there is a need for an update. In your view, are the various human rights conventions that we have in place in need of sprucing up, or are they still relevant? Is the problem just implementation?
For purposes of reparations for slavery, for gross violations of human rights abuses, international humanitarian law, international human rights law, international law as a whole is very clear. It provides the grounds and the steps for making reparative justice. What we are seeing with states that owe this duty is just a reticence, a complete reluctance to engage with this. It is a deeply troubling issue. It is one that they must sit on the table and discuss it genuinely. There is no need to revise international law with this regard. It's already clear. Of course, there are certain aspects of international law that might need to be updated. or rather to be codified. For example, we are discussing issues related to a Crimes Against Humanity Treaty that is currently being discussed by states or will be discussed by states in the coming years. But even that, already there is sufficient law to provide reparations for where these crimes what crimes against humanity have taken place. And this is replete across the continent. Crimes against humanity, genocide, war crimes, various violations against international human rights law have happened to Africans and people of African descent, and it is time for the former colonial powers to restitute and reparate and make remedy for these historical violations.
And just a final question: what would be the best outcome from this summit that would underscore that African countries are? This is no longer a whisper, the call for immediate address of reparations issues?
So the CARICOM group of states have what they call a 10-point agenda, which is a synthesized a sort of roadmap as to what they would like to see as reparations for Caribbean states. And this is exactly what we would like to see coming out of the African Union. As I said, this is the year of justice, reparations and reparative justice for colonialism, slavery, and past violations on the continent. It would be very helpful if the African Union would come up with a common position on what reparations is, chart the way forward for negotiations between former colonial powers and African states, a harmonized approach towards this as we move towards a framework on how reparations would be issued to African states. This, I believe, would be the best outcome from this summit and from the year's deliberations on reparative justice of the African Union.
All right, and that's where we leave it with you. Much appreciated your time and your insights. Alan Ngari is Africa Advocacy Director of Human Rights Watch, and that brings the time to 17 minutes to 10.
Get Channel Africa on DSTV Audio Bouquet. Channel 802. Nighttime radio, just the way you like it. On Channel Africa, where the night comes alive. Gender-based violence is destroying lives and tearing communities apart. It happens in homes, in schools, at workplaces, and too often in silence. But it doesn't have to continue. If you see it, speak out. If you are hurting, reach out. Because doing nothing is not an option. Listen to all 19 SABC radio stations from Wednesday, 23rd of July for Hard Talk, discussions, advice, dramas, educational shows, and interviews around GBV with experts, survivors, lawmakers, and the whole country affected by gender-based violence. For all your favorite SABC radio stations, call 0800 428 428 to report abuse or get help. GBV, it ends with you. This message is brought to you by the SABC. 1 hour, one continent, one voice. Africa World Hour with Tsepiso Makwetla on Channel Africa, the African perspective.
15 minutes to 10, as we usually say, one planet, countless stories. We bring you the voices, the stories, and the perspectives that matter. Now we look at this. The artificial intelligence tools like ChatGPT, they've transformed the way that we learn, work, and interact. But as these systems become more deeply woven into our lives, troubling questions are emerging about their influence, power, and, of course, accountability. A recent lawsuit in California alleges that ChatGPT encouraged a teenager to take his own life, raising urgent questions about whether these tools are equipped to handle moments of deep human vulnerability. With AI adoption accelerating globally, including across Africa, how do we balance innovation with safety and ensure these technologies actually protect rather than harm? We're joined now to unpack this complex and pressing issue by Ruthane Tendebwa, who is a leading digital media expert, speaking to us from Kampala, Uganda. Ruthane, a very good evening to you. Good to speak to you, and we truly are glad that you are able to join us.
Hello, good evening, Zapito. Thank you so much for having me. It is a pleasure to have this conversation with you.
Now, I think I asked this question for anybody who might have seen the story and might have been as confounded as I was. Just looking at tools like ChatGPT, how do they actually work, and are they designed for this? Because I wonder how people would actually think that they understand them properly enough for them to actually have a personality and be personal.
So at its core, ChatGPT is what you call a large language model, LLM, trained on vast amounts of text data. It is using statistical patterns to predict the next word in a sentence. If you're using it a lot, if you're using a certain tool a lot, it already understands how you think and learns your tone. So it is able to generate coherent and some, relevant responses. And what we know that it does not do is it does not understand in human sense, but it mimics understanding by recognizing your patterns in language. And I think that people often feel that it understands them personally because it is going to mirror your conversational tone and emotional cues. And, it is also going to remember the context that you have set within the session. So that is why then it is designed to be empathetic and affirming, and that feels like genuine care for people. So there's an illusion of intimacy, which is very, very powerful and potentially risky, especially when people are in vulnerable moments.
Is it a commentary on our society at the moment and how lonely and ostracized some of us are, in the sense that if we are now starting to depend, and I'm not sure if we actually understand that, on the warmth of an AI tool simply because it can predict what we're about to say because of how we've been interacting with it. And by the way, is it designed to do that, to mirror what you have been to it over the past interactions?
So it's a bit of both. I think that the tools are definitely fostering dependency, but also humans are projecting a bit of trust in them. So what happens is the tools are designed to be engaging, and they mimic empathy, they mimic companionship. And yes, because of the age that we're in, I think we've had this conversation time and time again, that we are the most connected, probably, generation in the world right now, but understandably, we are still the most lonely. So yes, we feel connected with everyone around us through social media channels, but there's a certain absence of depth that we do not have as people. And maybe because we're still looking for that human touch, then we get into technology. And AI has been around. Now it is more nuanced. It's more present with it, but it has been around. The algorithms have been around, since innovation and science started. But yes, humans naturally will, just be drawn to technology because it responds in emotionally intelligent ways in the times that we need it. I mean, you are looking for. You think you're feeling sick and you're trying to get through to a doctor, and probably you're unable to, because that is usually a physical visit, and you're like, let me just search
Google
what are these symptoms.
Yeah.
You get an answer. So definitely in moments of loneliness, distress, we tend to trust things that we can rely on. And right now you can rely on AI because it is always going to be there. Even when, the situation does not warrant it. So yes, the dynamic leads to emotional dependency, especially if we as human beings begin to prefer AI over human interaction. And I think we're beginning to see a lot of that.
Ruthane, I want to talk about then the designers of these AI tools. And obviously there's been a lot of improvements and evolution as they better up on the previous version. Facebook, for instance, has been saying, please don't say please to ChatGPT, because you confuse it and then it causes it to go into overdrive, and that costs a lot of money. So what are the limitations? And especially if you say, the design is to foster dependency. So I would imagine that there would also be limitations on accountability of what it ends up doing.
Definitely. I mean, the thing is, the people that design these tools are people, yeah. And the thing is that while there's an extensive reach, and it is happening so fast, especially when you come to Africa. I remember when we started having conversations about what the effect and importance or relevance of social media was, 2011, 2012, 2013 on the continent. We're not looking at, I could not find a single university, for example, that had a course on social media. We're now talking AI, and interestingly, there are a number of universities already that have courses on artificial intelligence. One of the reasons I said I was looking forward to this conversation is because I'm enrolled in a university where I'm doing an MBA online, Nexford University, and they talk a lot about AI, like it is part of the policy actually starting this month. You have to declare that you have used AI. They're saying it is not bad. Declare that you have used AI, and then go on with your work, because they understand that it is time and age. If you're trying to gain a certain level of knowledge, you're either going to have that that inclination to go bounce your thought off on AI, and it usually works. But when it comes to then holding these people accountable, the thing is, it is very complex when it comes. It is both a legal and an ethical question, because experts are going to say that the accountability is supposed to lie with developers and the companies, the ones that deploy the technology, the engineers and designers who build and train the models, and then the regulators who fail to enforce safeguards. So, for example, who is going to enforce safeguards on Facebook? Yeah. AI itself is not going to be held responsible. It is a tool, not a moral agent. It is how we use it. It is how our countries respond to how this technology affects it. It is how we parents respond to how technology affects our children, how we allow them access, when we allow them access, those kinds of things that we now have to go back to. That is when we now begin thinking about, stronger safeguards, and there is time, because, for example, there are issues that we see. For example, there's no real-time crisis detection, and I think that is what was happening with this young child. There is age verification, but not all the time. You don't have parental controls. You don't have human in the loop systems. You don't have professionals that are being flagged when certain conversations are taking place. Those are things that we could improve in these AI models, to talk about transparency or auditability of these AI decisions. These are conversations already happening, at certain levels in the West, but back home, obviously in Africa, we still have a long way to go to even just acknowledge.
And that's what I want to get into. And just for the benefit of our viewers, listeners who haven't seen the story, what it is that this child in California was speaking to ChatGPT almost on a daily basis over weeks, and it was telling the AI tool what it was feeling, and eventually the AI tool, when he expressed desire to commit suicide, it said, well, I understand what you're going through and I won't look away. So I want to talk about that accountability, because you're saying there is a recognition now of the adoption of AI, and you are now being asked, not in a necessarily in a manner that is critical of your use of AI. But I'm sure even psychiatrists would then adopt the use of AI tools. In that, the converse would be that wouldn't AI do the same? take on the affect of a psychiatrist if that information is ingested into it?
Yes and no. So, I mean, when we started this conversation, I said that, for example, Chat GPT is a large language model. It is trained on vast amount of text data. It is what you input into it that it is going to give it, the prompts that you ask for it. But also on the back end, it is what is fed to it, that it is able to, to kind of regurgitate or like bring back. Yeah. So that's the thing. So that's the thing that makes it feel very personal, because you have a system that, again, adapts to what you are asking it. So when it comes to then accountability, it is, we need to start looking at things like crisis detection, things that, classifiers that are tuned, locally validated to detect language of imminent harm, with things that will show us that, this is now a crisis, let's get in. Things like mandatory escalation. If a conversation crosses a certain threshold, is there something that, beeps and automatically...
So in this case, ChatGPT says the machine was supposed to do that it was a glitch. So, if you were to advise anybody who's building such an AI app, how would they fix that glitch in the future?
So that's the thing. You don't know when and how the glitch is going to happen. We were supposed to have this conversation on video, and then I have no power, Those are the things that then, so when we then begin talking about safeguards, they have to be inbuilt. And because they have to be inbuilt, they have to be very realistic and very, very knowledgeable of what may occur. Emerging risks, and that is very hard to predict. We are getting there, but how much can you predict? For example, in an African context where language is already an issue, where we have, mental health infrastructure is already scarce. How is that going to be a priority in our society if when it comes to being able to put up these safeguards? Can it be done? Yes. I think now that we're even having the conversation, I believe that is where we're starting. That is where it makes a lot of sense. But yes, so you'd have a lot of professionals getting in healthcare, mental health, even law agency, law protection, so that when certain things go off, then there is, there's like a certain level of urgency that then it creates, so that someone that is actually in need is going to be able to get the help that they need outside of, the AI, thing that they have thought to move to, or, to consult, in that regard.
And I say this tongue-in-cheek, not to make light of the seriousness of the situation, but if we say in the future of work, there may be room yet for tarot card readers, for psychics, to work with AI developers, because maybe they can foresee some of these challenges. What do you think?
Yes, because the truth is that these systems are powerful and they're very useful, but then they are not substitutes for trained human professionals in high-risk situations, which is what we have just, seen with this case. The right mix of technical safeguards, organizational practices, clear legal accountability, targeted regulation, all those things need to be able to be in sync so that we can reduce harm while preserving the benefits of what exists as the AI system. And I think that is where we are at now.
Yeah. Ruthane, thank you so much, my sister. Really appreciate it. And I'm sure we will engage you again. Ruthane Tidjebwa is a digital media expert, just helping us look at the complexities, at the use of AI tools, the dangers, and of course the benefits of it, but most importantly, the culpability and the type of accountability it can be held to. That's it for Africa World Hour this evening. Thank you so much for joining us. Do enjoy the rest of your evening. Up next is African Diaries.
We are on Open Views Audio Bouquet.